Over, what, the last decade or so, we've been watching this massive cultural shift just take hold. It's the rise of what some people are calling the sober curious nation.
And it's really important to say this isn't just about the traditional recovery movement. I mean, that's hugely important, of course.
Right.
But this is a mainstream lifestyle choice now. It's driven by people who are just prioritizing their health, their performance, mindful consumption.
Absolutely. And so today, we're plunging deep into the world of functional beverages. These glamorous, sometimes synthetic alternatives that promise you the social buzz, but without the toxic bill that always comes due.
It's a completely explosive area. You
Okay.
have advanced neuroscience getting actively blended with, ancient botanicals. It's fascinating. The industry is it's effectively trying to create a third way of social drinking.
A third way.
Yeah, and doing that, it forces us to confront a really poignant question. It's one we actually hear a lot from you, our listeners.
Right. And the question is this. If I got sober the old-fashioned way, through committed abstinence, through a recovery program, did I miss out? Did I miss some kind of sophisticated shortcut that's available now?
And that really is the core of our mission today.
Exactly. We're going to go beyond the slick packaging, beyond the influencer hype, to really examine the scientific and regulatory reality of all this.
We need to dissect the problem alcohol actually creates, analyze the solution they're proposing, which, all hinges on targeting the GABA system.
And then we'll scrutinize the products themselves, things like Sentia and Pasa Brew.
And finally, and this is crucial, we'll look at the immense regulatory walls that stand between these really complex molecules and, the mass market.
And this movement isn't just theoretical, it's financially seismic.
Huh.
We need to set the context for you.
We really do. We are talking about a market that is growing faster than almost any other beverage category out there. The global non-alcoholic spirits market. It was estimated at nearly $446 million in 2024.
Which is already a huge number.
It is, but the projection is what's really key. It's projected to hit almost $772 million by 2030. That's a compound annual growth rate of 9.5%.
Wow. That growth rate?
Right.
That tells you everything you need to know, really. This is not a niche market for people who, have a diagnosed problem.
Not at all. This expansion is overwhelmingly driven by younger, wealthier, and critically hyper-health-conscious consumers.
The kind of people who track their sleep, who optimize their diets.
Exactly. They're rejecting the toxicity of ethanol because it's incompatible with their wellness goals. It confirms this is not a fad. It's a structural rejection of traditional alcohol, and it's powered by data showing the inherent damage that ethanol causes.
Okay, so let's start there. Let's unpack the problem these innovators are trying to solve. Before we can even talk about the alternatives, we have to talk about the chemical reality, right? The documented inherent harms of ethyl alcohol.
It's so crucial to ground this discussion in the data. Alcohol, it's a small and very promiscuous molecule.
Promiscuous, I like that.
It is. It gets into the body, and it just interacts with so many different receptors all across the central nervous system. And that comprehensive interaction is why it carries such a high cost.
So when governments do these big harm assessments.
Exactly. When bodies in the UK, Europe, Australia, when they conduct these evidence-based assessments of harm, and they consider everything, physical health, societal impact, the whole lot, alcohol consistently, every single time, ranks among the most harmful drugs available.
And when you look at the global picture, the impact is just immense.
It is. Globally, alcohol accounts for a staggering 5.1% of the entire burden of disease and injury.
And that's not just, the internal damage to the person drinking.
No, not at all. Alcohol is a major global driver of these profound societal issues. We're talking about violent crime, suicide, road accidents. It's also a huge contributor to chronic health conditions like hypertension.
I think a lot of people sort of get the generalized health risks, but the specific dose-dependent cancer risk, I think that's often overlooked.
It's completely overlooked. The correlation with cancer is direct, and it is sobering. We know, for instance, that for women, consuming just one standard drink per day, just one, is associated with an increased breast cancer risk of between 5 and 9%.
That's shocking for just one drink.
It is. And internally, the liver immediately starts trying to metabolize this ethanol, and it converts it into something called acetaldehyde.
And that's the real poison.
That's the poison. It's a carcinogen, and the body just struggles to eliminate it efficiently.
You can actually see the physical signs of that struggle pretty quickly in the liver, can't you?
Oh, very quickly. Fatty liver disease, which is the accumulation of fat in the liver cells, it's not just something that happens to, heavy drinkers over decades.
Right.
Research shows that just 3 consecutive days of drinking can increase the fat levels on the liver. And what's more, 90% of people who regularly drink over 40 grams of alcohol a day.
Which is about what? 2 big glasses of wine?
Yeah, 2 decent-sized glasses of wine or maybe 2 pints of standard beer. 90% of them will develop fatty liver disease. It's a massive problem. Historically, societies have used alcohol for its unique ability to foster sociability, but because of this toxicity, it's always been divisive and costly.
So if the problem is alcohol's promiscuity and its toxicity, then the solution has to lie in understanding its specific mechanism, right? That stepwise effect. Let's get into the neurochemistry. What causes the buzz, and then what causes the inevitable fallout?
Okay, so the initial effect, the one that people are actually seeking, the relaxation, the anti-stress feeling, it's highly dose dependent. At the lowest doses, let's say between 0.02 and 0.04% blood alcohol concentration.
So just one drink, maybe?
Right, just feeling a little bit loose. The mechanism there is centered entirely on enhancing the primary inhibitory neurotransmitter in your brain, and that is GABA. Gamma-aminobutyric acid.
GABA. This is the brain's main off switch. So alcohol is basically putting a finger on that switch and just holding it down.
That is a perfect analogy. GABA's job is to calm down neuronal activity. Alcohol binds to these specific sites on what are called GABA-A receptors. They're these complex protein channels.
Yeah.
And when alcohol activates them, it makes the neuron less likely to fire an electrical impulse. So this global decrease in excitability is what produces that subjective feeling of, anti-anxiety, relaxation, social ease. It temporarily quiets that critical voice in your head.
That's the sweet spot. That is what people are chasing. But this is also where the precision of ethanol just completely breaks down. What happens when the dose goes up into that moderate range?
Right. So as your BAC moves into the moderate range, say 0.05 to 0.08%, the GABA effect continues. That's what leads to disinhibition, talking a bit louder, gesturing more with your hands.
The life of the party phase.
Exactly. But here's where it gets really complex and where the addiction driver properly kicks in. 2 other systems are activated: dopamine and endorphins.
And dopamine is the big one. It's always synonymous with reward, with wanting, with seeking behavior.
Precisely. Alcohol triggers a release of dopamine in the brain's reward centers, especially an area called the nucleus accumbens. And this isn't just about feeling good for a moment. Dopamine is the chemical that generates the urge to repeat the behavior.
The more-ish effect.
That's it. It drives that more-ish effect, linking alcohol use directly to craving and ultimately to dependence. When you look at the neurological profile, this mechanism is. It's disturbingly similar to how dopamine is hijacked by things like cocaine or nicotine. It drives the motivation. And then on top of that, alcohol also releases endorphins, which adds another layer of pleasure and pain suppression.
Okay, so a low dose is GABA, that's relaxation. A moderate dose brings in dopamine, which is craving and repetition. What about the really toxic end of the spectrum? The blackouts, the unsteadiness, the actual physical and cognitive impairment?
That is when the third major neurotransmitter system gets blocked. Once your BAC gets over 0.15%, you see severe cognitive and motor impairment, and that's largely because alcohol becomes a potent blocker of glutamate receptors.
Glutamate. If GABA is the off switch, then glutamate is the brain's main excitatory on switch.
Exactly. It is absolutely vital for learning, for memory formation, for motor control.
So the brain is now simultaneously being sedated by all this extra GABA, and at the same time it's being deprived of its main excitatory stimulus. It's being hit from both sides.
It's a double whammy. Blocking glutamate affects the hippocampus, which is the brain's memory factory. That prevents the consolidation of new memories, and that leads to amnesia, the blackout. It affects the cerebellum, which leads to loss of motor control. That's the ataxia, the slurred speech. This glutamate blockade is profoundly toxic. And with chronic use, it leads to neuroinflammation, it disrupts immune function, and ultimately, it triggers brain damage.
That comprehensive assault, GABA for the buzz, dopamine for the hook, and glutamate for the blackout, that really explains why ethanol is such a dangerous chemical. But to understand the alternative, we need to focus back on those GABA at the receptors. You said alcohol is promiscuous. Can you elaborate on the specific structure it hits?
Yes, and this is where we really define the target for a future molecule, like Alcarelle. The GABA-A receptor, it's not a single thing. It's a complex structure made of 5 protein subunits, and these subunits come in different types, denoted by Greek letters: alpha, beta, gamma, and so on.
So different combinations of these subunits form different types of receptors, and each one does a slightly different job in the brain.
Precisely. And ethanol, being a dirty molecule, it just interacts broadly across all of these subtypes. For example, some subtypes, like those containing the alpha-1 subunit, are primarily responsible for heavy sedation and drowsiness.
Okay.
Other subunits, like alpha-5, are strongly implicated in memory function. And when alcohol hits them, well, that's what leads to memory loss and amnesia.
So what are the specific targets that the neuropharmacologists are trying to hit? The ones responsible for the desirable effects, the sociability and relaxation.
The research has strongly suggested that the desirable effects of anti-anxiety and sociability with minimal sedation and dependence risk are mediated by receptors containing the alpha-2 and the alpha-3 subunits.
Ah, so that's the bullseye.
That is the pharmacological gold standard for these functional alternatives. The entire goal is to engineer a molecule that binds only to the alpha-2 and alpha-3 sites. You get the initial low-dose relaxation, while leaving the alpha-1 for sedation, alpha-5 for memory loss, the dopamine for addiction, and the glutamate for toxicity, leaving all of them completely untouched. That is the definition of pharmacological precision.
Okay, so here's where it gets really interesting. The quest for the GABA solution. We've established the chemical goal, but how are companies actually delivering this in a drinkable format? I mean, GABA itself isn't some mysterious substance.
No, not at all. GABA is naturally synthesized in our own bodies, and you can find it in high concentrations in things like fermented foods, kimchi, tempeh, even in common vegetables like kale and sweet potatoes.
Right. But as an ingestible, as a supplement, its regulatory status is just a nightmare of fragmentation.
It's bizarre. It speaks to the perceived pharmacological risk. In the US and Japan, pure GABA supplements, gummies, even functional foods like mental balance chocolate are all legal and widely marketed for stress relief and memory improvement. Japan has particularly embraced it.
It's treated almost like a vitamin there.
Almost. Yet, in the UK and many EU nations, the sale of pure, isolated GABA is prohibited.
Which seems so strange for something that's in broccoli.
It does. The regulatory bodies are just very cautious about its potential for misuse, despite its natural origin, and this creates a powerful incentive for innovators to skip pure GABA altogether and instead pursue these complex botanical mixes or novel synthetic routes.
But whether you use pure GABA or some botanical that helps produce it, you immediately run into the biggest hurdle of all, the blood-brain barrier.
The BBB. The brain's bouncer.
Right, its security system. A protective filter that keeps toxins out, but it also prevents large or complex molecules from getting in.
That's precisely it. And the prevailing wisdom for a very long time has been that simply swallowing a large amount of pure GABA is largely ineffective if you want a quick social buzz.
Because it just can't get through the barrier.
It's not thought to pass this protective barrier in significant quantities. Professor Renger Wittkamp notes that even if you take a substantial oral dose, the peak concentration in your bloodstream just disappears incredibly fast, often within half an hour, as the body's peripheral systems metabolize it.
So the secret sauce of these functional drinks isn't just the ingredient itself, but the delivery mechanism. It's about getting it to where it needs to go.
Yeah.
How are modern innovators trying to crack that uptake challenge?
They're using these sophisticated multi-ingredient formulas. The idea is to either maximize the body's own natural GABA production or physically enhance the ingredient's ability to cross the BBB. Let's look at the botanical approach first, which is really exemplified by a brand like Impossibrew.
Impossibrew, the brand that wants to be impossibly relaxing. Their story is a classic startup pivot, isn't it?
It really is. It was founded by Mark Wong, who wanted a non-alcoholic way to relax socially. And their formulae was inspired by traditional Chinese herbalism. They worked with pharmacologists to create this blend featuring botanicals like ashwagandha.
The adaptogen.
Right, known to reduce stress, and also L-theanine. L-theanine is an amino acid from tea, and it's actually thought to work by increasing the release of GABA and other calming neurotransmitters in the brain rather than being GABA itself.
I remember their initial struggle. They were rejected on Dragon's Den in 2022. That must have been a huge blow at the time, but they've kind of proven the market demand exists since then.
They absolutely did. I mean, despite that initial skepticism from investors, they have since shifted over 1 million units.
Yeah.
That demonstrates that consumers are willing to pay a premium for a functional, relaxing, non-alcoholic beer. They prove the market wants something more than just flavored water. They want a mild effect.
Okay, so that's the botanical blend approach.
Yep.
Now let's look at the strategy led by David Nutt and GABA Labs, the creators of Sentia, which leans much more heavily into hard neuroscience.
Nutt is the pioneer here. His background is absolutely crucial to understanding this. He was famously fired as a UK government advisor back in 2009.
Right, for his very candid comparisons of drug harms. He basically said alcohol and tobacco were significantly more harmful than substances like ecstasy.
He did, and that kind of blunt, evidence-based approach is what led him to co-found GABA Labs with this explicit, it is. The botanical blend is complex and wide-ranging. It features things like magnolia, linden, passionflower, licorice, ashwagandha, hawthorn, damiana, rose, tulsi, and hibiscus. A lot of these have traditional uses as nervines or sedatives.
A whole garden in a bottle.
Pretty much. But the truly innovative component is the bioenhancer, specifically piperine and borneol.
Piperine is in black pepper, right? I know it for improving nutrient absorption in the gut.
Correct. Piperine enhances the bioavailability of many compounds by modulating certain metabolic enzymes. But the real star player for crossing the BBB is borneol. Borneol is an organic compound found in plants like mugwort and various pines, and it's hypothesized to act as a transport facilitator.
So it's not an active ingredient itself in terms of creating the buzz, but it's more like a vehicle,
Yeah.
a delivery truck.
Precisely. Borneol is thought to temporarily and safely increase the permeability of the BBB. It acts like a courier or a carrier that allows the small, targeted GABAergic molecules in the blend to enter the central nervous system much more efficiently than they could on their own. It's a very elegant pharmaceutical-grade solution being applied to a botanical beverage.
That describes what's on the market now, but Nutt's ultimate vision is synthetic perfection, the molecule he calls Alcarelle.
Alcarelle is the holy grail. I mean, over the last decade, Nutt's team has synthesized around 50 different GABA-targeting molecules. The goal is to perfect one that achieves that ultimate pharmacological precision we were talking about earlier.
Binding only to the desired GABA-A receptor subtypes, the alpha-2 and alpha-3.
Exactly. If they succeed, we're talking about a molecule that produces the desired relaxation and sociability without any of the proven negative side effects. No memory loss, no aggression, no motor impairment, and crucially, no long-term liver or dependence issues.
That is the ambition.
And what's more, they're engineering Alcarelle to have a much shorter half-life than ethanol. The buzz would be quick, it would be predictable, and it would dissipate cleanly, minimizing the risk of chronic exposure. Nutt sees this as potentially the greatest public health revolution since, e-cigarettes or nicotine patches started replacing traditional toxic tobacco.
That comparison, e-cigarettes replacing tobacco, that really highlights the magnitude of the potential shift we're talking about. It would fundamentally separate the social ritual from the chemical poison.
Absolutely. The idea is to provide what he calls the benefits of slight drunkenness without any of the many pitfalls.
This all raises a really important question, though. For all the scientific sophistication, this market is currently driven by proprietary blends and, marketing claims. Does the evidence actually support the functional effects? Or are we maybe confusing a sophisticated delivery system with actual efficacy?
And this is where a healthy dose of skepticism is vital. The core challenge is the subjectivity problem. A lot of these companies rely very heavily on self-reported consumer feedback. In Pasa Brew, for instance, they'll tout that 71% of their customers reported feeling more relaxed.
Which sounds incredibly impressive on the surface. But when you dig into the methodology, that number it's a bit problematic, isn't it?
It is. That data comes from a self-selecting group of customers, people who already bought the product and then chose to complete a company questionnaire. Even Professor Nutt himself is very transparent about this. He acknowledges that GABA Labs, quote, tends to get positive feedback, but then there's probably not a lot of point in people telling us they didn't get much of an effect.
Right. There's a huge placebo component. The very act of buying an expensive, functional beverage predisposes you to expect a result.
A massive factor. And so for true scientific validation, what is required?
It has to be more than a survey.
Academic experts like Professor Whitcamp are very clear on this. They warn against cherry-picking loose scientific data to support a sophisticated marketing narrative. To confirm the relaxation effects of a complex product like Sentia, we need the gold standard.
A double-blind, placebo-controlled experiment.
Exactly. And until that happens, the claims, however compelling, remain anecdotal.
And the research on just pure oral GABA supplements has historically been pretty ambiguous, right?
Historically, yes. There was a 2020 systematic review that looked at 14 different studies on oral GABA. It found only limited evidence for stress and very limited evidence for sleep benefits. The consensus was often skeptical, mostly reinforcing that idea that it just couldn't cross the BBB efficiently.
But science rarely stays still. We've seen some very recent research that suggests maybe chronic congestion of GABA might have an effect, even if it's not the immediate direct buzz via the BBB.
That is the fascinating new wrinkle in this story. A 2025 study on mice subjected to chronic stress. It yielded some really significant findings. They demonstrated that long-term, sustained oral GABA administration did significantly alleviate anxiety-like behaviors in a dose-dependent way.
So it suggests an effect, even if it's not the, immediate recreational buzz that some consumers might be looking for.
Right. And if they weren't asserting direct BBB passage, how did they think the GABA was working to alleviate anxiety? This is where the term complement activation comes in, which sounds intensely technical.
It does. Break it down for us.
Think of complement activation as a key part of your innate immune system. It's this cascade of proteins that respond really rapidly to inflammation or stress or cellular damage. In states of chronic stress, this immune pathway can become hyperactive, which contributes to neurological inflammation and anxiety.
So the study suggested that GABA works by helping to restore homeostasis, or balance, by calming down this complement activation.
Exactly. So the GABA might be primarily interacting with the gut-brain axis or other peripheral systems, which in turn reduces systemic inflammation, and that leads to an eventual calming effect in the prefrontal cortex where stress is processed.
So the effect is neuroprotective and immunomodulatory. It's not necessarily a quick pharmaceutical hit, but more of a long-term regulation of the inflammatory response that's linked to stress.
Precisely. And they were very careful to note that they refrained from asserting direct BBB passage, which just confirms how complex this mechanism of action remains. This kind of research gives long-term efficacy claims new weight, but it doesn't necessarily validate the quick buzz promise of the functional drink market.
The science is complex and it's moving fast, but probably the biggest obstacle to market entry is just bureaucratic. It's the regulatory microscope. Let's talk about the roadblocks of getting these ingredients approved in the US and the EU.
Getting these complex, novel ingredients from the lab bench to the liquor aisle, it requires navigating these monumental regulatory bodies. In the U.S., the crucial hurdle is achieving what's called generally recognized as safe, or GRAS status from the FDA. This is mandatory for any substance that's intentionally added to food.
And GRAS status sounds both intimidatingly expensive and very time-consuming.
It is notorious for being both. The process often takes between 6 months and 3 years, depending on how novel the ingredient is, and the costs. They can range from $250,000 to well over $1 million.
Wow.
And that expense isn't just paperwork. It's assembling this comprehensive toxicology dossier that has to convince an expert panel that the substance is safe for its intended use.
And the cost difference in the testing methods must drive some really difficult business decisions for these companies.
Oh, absolutely. The regulatory process forces them into a major financial and, frankly, ethical trade-off. The gold standard for safety confirmation is in vivo testing trials involving live animals or human subjects. That can easily cost upwards of $500,000.
So to cut costs and speed up approval, what do?
They often strategically opt for less comprehensive but much cheaper testing methods. Things like in vitro studies, which are cell culture or lab-based, or in silico studies, which are computer modeling.
So they're faster and less expensive, but they lack the complexity to really understand how a novel compound interacts inside a living, breathing system.
Exactly. For a futuristic molecule like Alcarelle, which is entirely new, achieving comprehensive GRAS status based on solid reproducible data is absolutely paramount before it could ever be licensed for mass production globally.
And the EU has a similar system, right? Designed to police the introduction of new substances.
That's their novel food status framework. Any food or molecule that was not used significantly for human consumption within the EU before May 1997 requires pre-market authorization. Safety is rigorously evaluated by the European Food Safety Authority, or EFSA.
Does the EU regulatory structure offer any incentives for companies like GABA Labs that are sinking millions into this proprietary research?
It does, which is actually quite smart policy design. While the authorization for a new ingredient, once it's granted, generally becomes generic, meaning any company can then use it, the new regulation allows for 5 years of data protection for proprietary science developed by the applicant.
So if Sentia, for example, invests heavily in complex, expensive human trials to prove the safety of a specific blend, they get 5 years to capitalize on that investment before their competitors can just leverage the same safety data.
It's a critical edge in a hyper-competitive market, a necessary one.
Okay, so After this journey through ethanol's toxicity, GABA's mechanism, and the whole regulatory battlefield, let's circle back and address the core question for you, the listener.
Yeah.
If you achieve sobriety through traditional means, did you miss out on a gentler, more sophisticated way forward?
It's a vital and, I think, a philosophical point. The old-fashioned way abstinence, often through structured recovery, it remains profoundly validated and necessary, particularly for those with severe alcohol use disorder or a significant history of dependence.
Right. These new drinks aren't for them.
They're designed and marketed overwhelmingly to adult social drinkers who are seeking moderation or maybe a non-toxic alternative to unwind on a Tuesday night. They're not substitutes for clinical dependence treatment.
And we know that the younger you are when you're exposed to alcohol, the higher your lifetime risk of developing dependence becomes.
That data point is central to validating the abstinence model for younger people. Youth who start drinking before the age of 15 are a staggering 6 times more likely to develop alcohol dependence later in life compared to those who wait until they're 21 or older.
It just underscores the physical reality that the brain doesn't finish its significant development until your early to mid-20s.
Exactly. The minimum legal drinking age of 21 in the U.S. is rooted in that evidence. Young brains react differently to ethanol. They metabolize it poorly and get intoxicated almost twice as fast.
Now, the appeal of these new products rests so heavily on this idea that they're all natural and botanical. But the complexity of these blends, magnolia, ashwagandha, passion flower, that has to introduce some serious caution about combination and dosage.
Absolutely. The all-natural label is often a marketing tool that can mask some very potent pharmacological activity. Many of these ingredients like valerian, kava, ashwagandha, lemon balm, they're powerful herbs classified as sedatives or nervines. They all act in similar ways to depress or slow down the central nervous system.
So what happens when you combine them? Why is that particularly dangerous?
The effects are cumulative. They add up. And that can lead to what we call central nervous system, or CNS, depression. It's like stepping on the brake pedal twice when your system is already slowing down.
So the risks are things like excessive dizziness, confusion.
Dizziness, confusion, impaired judgment, and potentially even life-threatening respiratory depression. You can experience severe cognitive impairment and motor control loss, effectively mimicking the toxic effects of heavy alcohol use, even without any ethanol.
And the sources pointed to specific combinations that are highly hazardous.
Yes. For example, valerian and kava should never be mixed. There's a risk of compounded sedative effects and potential liver toxicity. Similarly, kava and alcohol is a catastrophic combination, significantly increasing the risk of both liver damage and severe CNS depression.
So the market needs to be educated that these functional drinks, even the botanical ones, they are not simply benign herbal teas.
Not at all. They are pharmacologically active compounds that require mindful consumption and a real understanding of the interaction risks.
And despite the regulatory friction and the need for more of that gold standard evidence, the cultural shift is undeniable. And the major players in the traditional drinks industry are responding.
They cannot afford not to. That 9.5% growth rate is just irresistible to them. The anecdote from David Nutt about the major drinks executive, the one who predicted the elimination of alcohol usage by 2050, that's very telling.
Because even though the marketing department might resist disruptive change while the profits are still high,
the executive leadership, they know which way the tide is turning.
and we see that knowledge manifesting in these huge acquisitions.
Precisely. The big corporations are hedging their bets and investing heavily. A prime example is Diageo, one of the world's largest spirits makers, acquiring the non-alcoholic spirits brand Ritual Zero Proof. This confirms that the non-alc functional beverage movement is seen not as a passing trend, but as the future of sophisticated social drinking. It's a critical component of their long-term portfolio.
They recognize that consumers are demanding a decoupling of the social experience from the toxic outcome.
They are.
This has been an extensive deep dive. We've moved from alcohol's toxic profile all the way to the cutting edge of neuropsychopharmacology. To synthesize this whole journey, the fundamental flaw of ethanol is its promiscuity. It hits the GABA system for sociability, the dopamine system for addiction, and the glutamate system for toxicity.
And the entire industry is now responding with this massive effort toward pharmacological precision. Current products like Sentia and Impossibrew are using these complex botanical blends enhanced by bioenhancers like Piperine and Borneol to specifically target the initial desirable GABA-A receptor effects. all while trying to navigate the immense complexity of the blood-brain barrier and the high cost of GRAs and novel food approval.
So the explosion of these sophisticated functional drinks is catering to a massive cultural shift toward mindfulness and health. It's providing a genuine alternative for social connection, but without the toxic price tag that ethanol always demands. It's about separating the ritual of the glass in hand from the inevitable hangover.
And this movement leaves us with a provocative thought, one that really challenges the very foundations of global drug regulation. If scientists like David Nutt succeed in creating Alcarelle, a synthetic molecule that binds only to those specific GABA-A subtypes, alpha-2 and alpha-3, to produce a clean, non-toxic social muzz that can be cleanly antidoted or wears off predictably and rapidly, will governments continue to regulate it alongside traditional, highly toxic alcohol?
And if a substance perfectly mimics the feeling of low-dose intoxication, without any of the proven health risks or dependence risks or the societal harms that are associated with ethanol, how does that fundamentally change human social rituals worldwide? And what does it do to the legal definition of an intoxicant?
It's a question that forces governments to decide. Are they regulating the feeling of intoxication, or are they regulating the harm? If the harm disappears, the regulatory framework must follow, something potent to mull over until our next deep dive.